get by. It resides between my eyes. Walked through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like a beach if you find the sand. And right now, I feel like 100 grand.
You are listening to Inspired Insider with your host, Dr. Jeremy Wise.
Dr. Jeremy Weiss here, founder of InspiredInsider.com, where I talk with inspirational entrepreneurs and leaders. Today is no different. I have Felix Velarde. And Felix, I always like to point out before I formally introduce you other episodes people should check out of the podcast. Big thank you to Todd Taskey for introducing us. Todd has the Second Bite podcast. And you know Todd, but he basically helps agencies, pairs them with private equity, and helps sell agencies. And he says Second Bite because sometimes they sell more on the second bite than they do on the first. You have a lot of experience in M&A, so we're going to talk about that and what your experience has been. So that's a really good one. Another one, Felix, is with Adee Clevitt. Her agency, is a done for you for SOPs for companies. So she goes into a company, helps them with the sexiest thing that they have, which is to make sure all their SOPs are buttoned up. So it helps streamline onboarding and of staff, of clients, and everything like that. So that we geeked out on operational things, our favorite productivity software. That was a really good episode. And Kevin Hurrigan of Spinutech had an agency since 1995. Now you predate Kevin. I won't age you too much, but 1995. And he talks about just the business landscape, the internet landscape, the agency landscape dating back to 1995. So check that one out as well. This episode is brought to you by Rise 25. Rise 25, we help businesses give to and connect to their dream relationships and partnerships. How do we do that? We do that by helping you run your podcast. We're an easy button for a company to launch and run a podcast. And we do the strategy, which is the most important, the accountability, and the full execution. So Felix, we call ourselves the magic elves that run in the background and make it look easy for the host so they can create amazing content and create amazing relationships. And most important, focus on running their business. You know, for me, the number one thing in my life is relationships. I'm always looking at ways to give to my best relationships. And I've found no better way over the past decade to profile the people and companies I most admire and share with the world what they're working on. So if you have questions about that, you should definitely think about podcasting. Go to rise25.com or email us at support@rise25.com. And I'm excited to introduce Felix Velarde. He's founder of the 2Y3X program. You can check it out at 2y3x.com. They've helped scale 40 plus agencies. It doesn't include his own agencies, by the way. He was the founder of one of the first digital agencies in 1994. Predates Kevin, even I don't have to tell him that, Felix. And his second agency actually became the digital arm of Lowe. He founded over 6 agencies, 2 agency groups. He's acquired over 17 agencies, sold 6 of his own, helped another over 6 sell, lots of experience. And you can check out his book. I've listened to it. It's fantastic on Audible. Scale at Speed, How to Triple the Size of Your Business and Build a Superstar Team. Actually, the second edition is coming out now. So by the time you listen to it, it's already out. So Felix, thanks for joining me.
My pleasure, Jeremy. How are you?
I am fantastic. And we'll dig into the book a little bit and what was in the second edition. What made you write a second edition? But I just want to start off with talk about 2i3x a little bit and what you do. And if you're listening to the audio, there is a video component. So we're going to pull up his site. So talk about 2i3x.
So 2i3x was born out of my own frustrations as an agency founder. As you said, I founded a whole bunch of agencies. And I wasn't very good at it at the beginning, mainly because I had no idea what I was doing. And nobody teaches you how to run an agency. Nobody teaches you how to run businesses well. And my ego was too big to listen to anybody else. And so by the time I was halfway through my agency founder career, which was probably 10 years into my career, I'd already started 3 agencies, and I had made every mistake that you could possibly make running agencies, some of them repeatedly, which is a bit dumb. And I just thought that there's got to be a better way of learning how to run an agency, because agency's been around for 170 years. in more or less the same format. And surely we shouldn't have to do the whole thing by trial and error over and over and over again. And so when I finished my agency career and I was trying to think, oh, what do I do next and how do I give back? And you know, the journey that you go through as a former founder and a serial CEO, and I'd been an agency group CEO. And I thought, you know what, why don't we pull something together that helps agencies beat the growing pains and get through the sort of the standard agency growth problems, the feast and famine, the hitting your head against the ceiling over and over again. The how do you get yourself out of the weeds? How do you empower people? How do you create a succession team? And above all, how do you create value so that you can eventually sell? And so that's how 2Y3X was born. And 2Y3X does what it says on the tin. It's a 2-year program, and it will triple your value, at least. It can triple your revenue, at least, and we back it with guarantees and so on. But it's really about how do you empower the next generation of talent in your agency or in your business, so that they can take the responsibility off you, so you can focus on more strategic things like, I don't know, opening up in New York or coming to the UK or writing a book or mentoring other people, or even going into the M&A space, which is somewhere that I am now even more heavily involved with these days, so that you can head towards selling your agency at the highest possible value. So that's where it was born, and that was about 8-9 years ago, I guess. So yeah, that's where it came from. And so I did that for a couple of years on my own, and then I started finding people wanting to do it with me, and yeah, it's grown from there.
We'll talk about mistakes, maybe even some of the repeated mistakes that people can learn from. But I wanted to start with predictable growth phases. You talk about these predictable growth phases. One of the things you help with the program, people to break through these growth plateaus. Can you talk a little about those predictable growth phases?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I was really, really good when I started my own agencies. I was really, really good at getting to 1 million really, really fast. And that you know, I found that very easy. And then I could get to a couple of million, 2.5 million, pretty quickly after that. So call it 2-3 years, and I'd be up at a couple of million, 2.5 million. And then I'd get stuck. And so my early career was creating these agencies that would become groundbreaking agencies, famous. They'd win all the awards. In fact, my second agency was the world's most awarded digital agency, Head New Media. That was the one that became the digital arm of Lowe worldwide. And I had these amazing agencies that did brilliant work, win all awards. The culture was amazing, and I could not break through this 2.5 million revenue ceiling. I just couldn't do it. And I'd fall back a bit, and then I'd take another run at it, and I'd hit my head. And after a while, that became pretty bruising. And so I found myself in a situation where my first 2 or 3 agencies, I sold them when they got to that bit, because I couldn't break through this sort of kind of, I don't know, concrete ceiling above my head. And I, in retrospect, you know, I had a 20-year career and I had 6 agencies of my own, and then eventually I had a group of 12 agencies. And I saw this happening time and time again with founders. My friends and my colleagues and my competitors all go through the same thing. You'd get to either 1 million and stop, or you'd get to 2.5 million and stop, or you'd get to 3.5, 4 million and stop and get stuck. And it seemed to be this repeating pattern. And what I realized eventually, and it took me ages, right? You know how common sense always comes from somebody else, right? It took me retrospect and hindsight and several failures to realize that actually what happens is that when you're 1 million in revenue, you become perfect at delivering, at being 1 million agency, right? You become perfect at this size that you know how to manage. And you want to win clients that are bigger, but clients are a bit more clever than you think they are. And clients actually want people who know how to deliver at 2 million scale, right? And so you perfect yourself and you get better and better at being 1 million agency. But the clients that you want, they want a 2 million agency. You ain't very good at that. So in order to get to be a 2 million agency, you have to break stuff. Now, for me, I was very good at breaking through the million barrier, because for me, it was, I knew I had to hire somebody who was more expensive than I could really afford, who had more experience. And so I'd hire them and I'd sacrifice my own salary for a year to get them in. And they would show us the ropes of being 2 million, right? They would show us the SOPs and the processes and the workflows and the how to sell to people like that and all of that kind of stuff. And so they would drag us up. And then we perfect this amazing 2 million agency, 2.5 million agency. And we'd get better and better and better at being a 2 million agency. And we'd win clients that wanted a 2 million agency. And we'd be sitting there going, well, we want the bigger clients. But the bigger clients wouldn't hire us because guess what? We're a 2 million agency. With all those 2 million, we don't have, the sorts of things that a $1 million client, we don't have the processes to be able to cope with a $1 million client. I mean, we thought we did. But the $1 million client knows that we don't, right? Because they're not stupid. So it became this kind of, this realization of, oh my goodness, we've hit a barrier, not because we don't know how to run a business, not because our work isn't any good, not because we're not good at pitching, because we're great at pitching and selling. It's because we're not set up for the size of clients that we really aspire to. And so that takes change. And so that transformational change, the transformation you have to go from being a family unit, which is what you are until you're a million, to being this kind of inner circle and outer circle and a cult arrangement that you are when you're a $2 million or pound or euro agency, and then turning it into a business. And those transformations happen at predictable points. And bizarrely, the predictable points are in multiples of 12 people. So your first million, you do with 12 people. But to be the perfect 2 million agency, you need to be 24 people. And then you can do 2.5 million of revenue, right? And to be a 3.5 million, you need 36, and so on. So it became, the insight from us was, oh my goodness, it's about the transformation that you have to do, the shift, the mindset shift, process shift, and so on, because that's the barrier. And it's the only barrier that really matters, because everything else you're capable of, because you do the great work.
What are some of those changes needed? You mentioned at the 1 million mark. To get beyond that, sacrificing salary. I mean, you have to, I guess, take a leap and hire more experienced people. And what are some of the changes needed from the 2 million to break through to get through the 2 million mark?
So it's really interesting because one of the changes that happens when you're a million revenue is that's the point at which you realize you need to professionalize your account management. Okay, if you're in that kind of agency. So I'm not talking about sort of software as a service or things like that. I'm talking about agencies that have a client services function. So at a certain point around the million mark, you realize that you need a professional account manager, but you can't afford a client services director. Because a client services director is going to cost you 200 grand, right? You can afford to sacrifice some of your salary and your dividends and so on. And so you can pay for, I don't know, an account director maybe. And you poach an account director who's on their way up. Yeah, who's got a really great reputation. They want their next move up, and you persuade them to come to you, drop in salary, but this is their route to becoming client service director. The problem that you've got there is that, or the benefit is, you can afford them. And they will come to you and they will work with you and they will professionalize you or help professionalize you. The problem that comes with that is they've never been a client services director. So they can't take you through the next stage, right? So the million that you break through the million by hiring the account director, and they take you to 2 million, at which point you need a group account director or a client services director type be able to professionalize you even further. And when I say even further, I don't mean organically and incrementally. I mean to change everything. Because the client who's going to give you $1 million of budget expects completely different stuff from the one who's phoning you up and asking you questions about how does SEO work, right? The $1 million client knows you know and wants to know what the dashboard's going to look like, right? And whether you can report to their board. When you get up to the 10 million, they don't even want that, right? They want to know how much you've added to their share price, right? And so it changes at each of these major steps. So by the time you get to your kind of 2.5 million, suddenly you need to re-professionalize and get even more senior people in. And then that again is suddenly you've got to pay more money and you've got to find that money somehow. So they're kind of leaps of faith. But at the same time, the other transformations that you need to do, or translations, if you like, is you need to start understanding what your workflows are like. Not just having a team where everybody mucks in for each other. You now need to departmentalize, and you need to have cross-department briefs, and you need tracking for results and so on. And then by the time you get to being a $3 million agency, you start needing ROI dashboards and things like that. And you need reporting lines and middle management and so on. And each of these transformations is hugely disruptive unless it's done perfectly. And so the program is there to do the translations in a risk-free way.
There's a couple things that stick out, Felix, when you talk about that. I kind of categorize them into key hires, and also you talked about expectation of clients, and the expectation of clients changes with some of those stages. Talk about key hires. So you mentioned, obviously the account, getting the account manager up to client services manager. What are some of the other key hires that need to be put in place for these phases?
So I'm not going to talk about job titles because they're peculiar to each type of agency, and there are a million types of agency, and they'll all need different things. But there's a certain point, and it usually happens at the second inflection point, so the 2.5 million point. Sometimes we come across agencies who join the program and they're at 4 million, and they still have this problem. The problem is they've still got people in their team who are C players. And what I mean by C players are the disaffected, the people who say no, who leave, who sort of sneak off early, or they gripe and they whinge while they're outside having a cigarette, and they influence other people to be disaffected, right? Or disgruntled employees. They're the people that can't be bothered and they don't put in the effort, and you wouldn't ask them to make a round of coffee because they just won't be, and it'll be a pain, right? We all know that these people exist, and unfortunately we carry these people. One of the things that I found really bizarre is that by and large, those are the people who are in charge of culture, right? We're the ones who say, they're the ones who say, they're the ones who put themselves in a position where they organize the Friday evening drinks after work, right? Or the softball game or whatever it is. And yet, these are the toxic people in your culture. Now, the massive revelation that I had probably 2 years into my career was that I'd watched a bunch of these people that I'd finally gotten rid of. You get rid of them after like 2 years, and you sort of hum and ah, and you say, well, we can't get rid of them because they're in charge of leading client number one, or, they're in charge of drinks on Friday. So of course we can't get rid of them, right? And eventually you find yourself somehow luckily getting rid of them. And you watch them going from being the person that you hate seeing in the office, the one who brings everybody down, and they move to the next company, and suddenly they become a superstar. And you think, is it me? Am I just a really crap manager? What am I doing wrong, right? And you beat yourself up. And I did this for quite a long time. And then I realized eventually that actually, you know what? They just don't share my values. My values as a founder, our team's values as a leadership team, as an agency team. And what you find is that the people that you get on best with, your business partner, your spouse, your best client, right? Your favorite friend, they share your personal values. And I don't mean values like the customer always comes first, not the crap that you see on people's websites. I mean, the stuff that comes from in there, right? Your heart. And those are the people that you want around you. And if you really think about who's in your team, the A players are the ones who share your values. They're enthusiastic. They love coming into work. You love working with them. They'll go the extra mile. Clients love working with them. They're part of you know that they share your values. And the C players are the ones who don't. And so the first time you realize that actually not everybody on your team shares your values, and you start thinking, okay, should I do something about this? And everybody, by the way, in your team knows who the C players are. In exactly the same way that everybody on your team knows who the A players are. But you know who your C players are. You're listening to this, you're saying, yeah, that's Mike and Sally and Dodgett. And you're kind of, you know who it is, right? Get rid of them now. They will be happier. You will be happier. They'll have the opportunity to shine and be an A player somewhere that they do fit. And your team will suddenly think, oh my goodness, this place is becoming more coherent. This place is becoming more fun. And no, it's not acceptable to badmouth people behind their back. It's not acceptable to say no to stuff. It's not acceptable to whinge and gripe and moan about this latest client, right? And when you get rid of people and people start being enthusiastic and they say, oh, I can guarantee this will happen. I guarantee this will happen. The day after you get rid of your C players, you will get 2 or 3 people coming up to you saying, John, I have no idea why you didn't do that 6 months ago or a year ago, right? Sally, why didn't you do that ages ago? And it happens every single time. For me, it was like this amazing revelation. I got people coming out of the woodwork saying, Felix, God, why didn't you do that 9 months ago when we were starting to tell you that they were an asshat? And it's like, yeah, okay. All right, lesson learned.
You mentioned C players, and some people think of work, but you're really talking in terms of cultural fit. The person could do amazing work, and from a culture standpoint, what was you had some revelations. What was it's just sometimes hard to believe that they would go off. Is some other company's values, like talking behind people's back, or like, why would they thrive somewhere else?
It's no. Don't get me wrong. It's not that talking behind people's back. That's a symptom. It's a symptom of not being in the right place, right? And no, my values are honor and integrity and inclusiveness. I've been an anti-racism campaigner since I was 13. I balance every single board that I ever take over or ever work on so that it's gender balanced. Those are my values, right? Now, somebody else's values might be it's all about the money, right? Or
just get results.
That might break down to, I've got to, family comes first, it beats everything else, right? Other people might say honesty above everything, right? Now, I fired a client, not recently, but one of our very few failures on the 2Y3X program was we had a client who was a bit iffy, let's say. And eventually, one day, I caught him in a lie. So I fired him because I don't need to work with people like that, right? Now, other people don't mind that. And that's fine too. It takes all sorts, right? I can't expect everybody to share my values. And actually, we all keep each other in balance. You need left and right, you need front and back, you need progressives, and you need conservatives, because it keeps the wilder excesses at bay. And no matter how much I might think that my worldview is perfect and the world should be like that, the reality is it probably works better because it isn't. Right? So if there's a company over there where this person who whinges and gripes and moans and just says, "Oh, I don't like the work we're doing. I think it's rubbish," they'd be happier over there where they think the work is great, and I don't like the work, because there'll be a client for them. That's fine. So I don't have any problem with that. I don't have a problem with different personalities and so on. I want a mixed crew of multicultural weirdos, but that's just me, right? You might want something completely different. The next person might want somebody, a bunch of people who've all come from McKinsey and have got a degree from Wharton. That's fine too, in a funny, peculiar kind of way, and they can have it, which means I don't have to.
No, that makes sense, and I could see that because we're one company. Maybe their culture and their values is growth, and another one's is more balance. If someone comes in wanting balance in their life, whatever, and they're in this growth company, they're not going to be happy, and it becomes a symptom of not the culture there.
Yeah, completely. I mean, if you think about Jim Collins, right, and his get the right people on the bus, I think it's not just about whether people share your values. It's about whether they share your vision and your dream, or at least the direction of it. So for me, I had a really interesting conversation the other day. Somebody said to me, you're all about scaling. What if you don't want to scale? It's like, that's fine. If you don't want to scale, then don't read my book, because it's not going to have very much in it for you. If you want to triple your revenue or triple your value, or you want to sell at some point for millions, read the book, because it's great and it'll tell you how to do it. Or join 2y3x and we'll do it with you and for you. But if you don't want to scale, then that's perfectly acceptable too. I've got nothing against people who don't want to scale, in the same way I've got nothing against people who want to work in, enormous companies, each to their own. But I do want to make sure that everybody in the companies that I work with wants to be on the journey of scaling. Because if they don't want to be on their journey, they're going to be unhappy pretty quickly. And if they're unhappy, they're in the wrong place. And I want everybody around me to be happy. And if they're in the wrong place by being with me, I want them to be somewhere else where they will be happy.
Yeah.
And as a leader, I think that that's really, really important.
So Felix, someone's listening to this, and like you said, they immediately identify, I know exactly who he's talking about in my company, right?
Yeah.
But all these things creep up, like, well, they're in charge of this client, they do this, how would I replace them? What's your approach on letting someone go? Like, knowing you need to do it and then actually doing it.
Make the decision today, do it tomorrow. Unless you made the decision in the morning, in which case do it in the afternoon. Listen, you're going to do it anyway, right? The sooner it happens, the sooner they can be happy somewhere where they'll be happy, and the sooner your team will be happy too. It's as simple as that. It's when's the best time to plant a tree, right? 20 years ago. When's the second best? Today. When's the best time to buy a computer? Yesterday or tomorrow, right? Just do it now.
So let's say someone listens and go, great, I'm going to do it. And maybe they haven't had those tough conversations before. Maybe they are awkward at them. What are some ways that you actually approach and handle the actual conversation itself?
Well, I mean, bearing in mind that I don't manage companies myself anymore, and haven't done for quite a long time. As a leader, my approach has always been straightforward honesty. It's, I don't think you're a fit. I think you'll be happier elsewhere. I will give you all of the help. Do you want me to give you do you want me to introduce you to a bunch of recruiters and headhunters? Because I truly believe that the people who aren't happy where they are will be happy somewhere else. And if they will be happy somewhere else, they're not bad people. And I should help them get where they want to go. Now, that gives me a great reputation. It gives me a reputation with those people, with their next employer, and with the headhunters. It's a win-win. And I'm a huge believer in karma. I think what goes around comes around, especially in business. And I think if you approach business in a humane way, then business will treat you reasonably well too in return somehow.
Talk about scale at speed for a second. How to triple the size of your business and build a superstar team. What felt you made you feel the need to write the second edition? What's in the second edition that's so important that you spent the time and energy to come up with it.
Here's something funny, right? I'm just going to show you. This is the first edition. I don't know if you can see that, right? This is the second edition. Second edition is smaller. It's and to my mind easier to read. It's actually slightly longer as a book. The differences are primarily around the US market. So I wrote the first edition in, when was it, 2021. And it was published by Hachette Worldwide, which was enormously satisfying for the ego. And obviously you can get it on Audible, and it's read by Roger Davis, who's amazing. He's got this lovely British accent that you can speed up 2x and still hear every single word. It's amazing. And Kindle and all the rest of it, Apple and Kobo and all that. That book took me more or less 3.5, 4 years to write. So it was a long process. And I wrote that, the original book I wrote for me, the young me. I wrote that for the entrepreneur, the agency owner or agency leader who hadn't had a long career of being groomed to be an agency leader, and wanted to know what the processes and frameworks were to be able to make these leaps and to maximize the value for exit and to empower people largely. And so that was the original thesis. Now, I then 2Y3X grew, and the book actually is the full manual for the 2Y3X program. It's absolutely everything, soup to nuts. But after it came out, I started working more and more in the States, and with more US clients, I realized that there are some fundamental differences in American agency markets. In Europe, for example, if you have an agency that's doing 3 million in revenue, almost by definition, 80+% of your clients are multinational brands. Right? You're doing 3 million, you've got Unilever, Procter & Gamble, General Motors, a whole bunch of famous brands that you see in the supermarkets and all that kind of stuff, right? In the States, you can have a $3 million agency where all of your clients are paying you $1,000 a month, and all of your clients are local nail salons, right? And that's perfectly normal. That is a very different way of thinking about business. And so I started coming across these agencies in the US and finding agencies. So again, in Europe, to start an agency, most agencies are started by either a creative or a suit, where a client said, if you were to leave your toxic agency, I'd come with you, right? And so they're started by creatives or suits who have no idea what they're doing when it comes to running a business, but they think that they can produce good work for the client, and the client is giving them budget and faith. And that's how the vast majority of agencies are started in Europe. And so they're all creatively driven, all client service driven. They're not business driven. And in the US, they're more business driven. So you'll get agencies where somebody has had a plumbing supplies firm, made some money and bought an agency because they quite enjoyed working for with an agency when they were doing their plumbing supplies firm's advertising, right? And so it's a different kind of mindset. It's much more entrepreneurial. And so the second edition of the book is more geared towards that kind of American entrepreneurial mindset. Because when we started working with American companies and putting those American agencies through the 2Y3X program, we discovered, to our surprise, that they would thrive just as well, in fact, better than the European-style agencies that had been coming through the program for years and years and years before that.
So in the second edition, is it more geared towards that?
Well, kind of. I mean, I'll give you one of the differences, just as an illustration. In the UK, which is arguably one of the most creatively sophisticated markets in the world for in advertising and creativity, digital creativity, the multiples are pretty high. If you get to 1 million of EBITDA, then you could expect to get at least 8 times EBITDA as your sale price. In the States, the first agency that I bought in the States was doing $3.5 million of EBIT, and we bought it for a multiple of 4. And that was kind of like, wow, this is very, very different. So, you know, the difference in multiples is because in the UK there are a small number of agencies and they're all working for international brands. And so if you want those brands in your portfolio, then you've got to pay top dollar. Whereas in the States, there are vast numbers of agencies that you can buy, and therefore the price is lower. So that's very much addressed in this in the new edition, which comes out May the 7th, as you said.
You obviously have a lot of experience, Felix, in M&A. What are some of the factors that you look at when you're buying an agency?
Well, the same factors everybody else looks at, actually. So unfortunately, nothing revelatory. But if I'm acquiring an agency, I will do the same kind of basic due diligence as every single other buyer, from the networks, so Interpublic, WPP, you know, Publicis, and so on, Omnicom. They will look at exactly the same things as I will look at, and I'm buying agencies that are smaller than the networks will buy, or Stagwell, or people like that will buy. But when I'm looking for an agency, and I'm looking at an agency, the basics are fame. Are you differentiated from your competitors? Specialization. Are you really, really, really good at what you do? Because if you're just the same as everybody else, then I might buy you for bulk, but I'm not going to buy you because you fill a gap in my strategically diverse portfolio. Financial rigor. Do you do your accounts properly? Right? Can I trust your numbers? What else? Stability. Is your growth rate steady? Is it predictable? Because I'm not buying your previous growth. I'm buying next year's growth, and the year after, and the year after that. Succession. This is absolutely critical. When you leave as the founder and the and CEO of your agency, when you leave, who's running the business? And the reason I ask that is because certainly in my experience, and there's a statistic in Europe, which is 60% of founders who sell their agency don't survive the earnout. And the reason for that is you didn't start your agency to have a new boss. So I acquire you, or you get acquired by, you know, whoever it is, Geometry or whatever, or Stagwell. They come along, they buy your agency, and suddenly you've got to report to somebody, and you've got to report in ways that you know. When I got bought by Interpublic in Low Worldwide, they used to fly me to New York once a month to present a spreadsheet that I simply didn't understand to a bunch of people who did not know what I was doing because I had blue hair and they didn't understand digital, but they were from advertising, so they were cool. And it was this culture clash from hell, right? You don't want a boss. If you run an agency, you didn't start it so you could have a new boss. So succession team is really critical for the buyer, because the buyer is looking for ways to de-risk their purchase. And the reason that they're looking to de-risk it is not because they're worried about the $1 million or $2 million that they're spending on buying you. They're worried about the fact that you are worth to them 10 million or 20 million in future value. And they don't want to risk the 10 or 20 million, not the 2 million that they spent in cash on you know, changing your life. They're worried about the 10 or 20 million that is going to change their shareholders' lives, right? So they want to de-risk everything. So they assume that you're going to leave, that you're going to tear your hair out and you're going to run away screaming at some point. who's the succession team? And the succession team is not just your senior management team, they're the people who will drive the future of your business. And again, that's one of the core things that 2Y3X and the Scale at Speed book address, is how to build that succession team, how to empower it so that you can leave, or you can do M&A, or you can start your green startup or whatever it is that you really want to do. Because succession is so important. What else? Client concentration. If I am looking at your agency from a point of view of buying it, or somebody's looking at your agency, and 40% of your revenue comes from one client, what happens if that client has a complete, just bolt from the blue and decides to fire you, right? Decides to, time's up, right? New CEO comes in with their own agency, they want bigger, fresher things, you're out. Nothing you can do about it. Your amazing relationship has gone out the window, Now, that 40% of your revenue suddenly means that I paid over the odds for your business. Massively over the odds. You've got to more or less start again from halfway up the ladder again, right? I don't want to be stuck with that. So I need to see a very good broad spread of clients where none of them is a strategic risk. And so those are the principal things. Those are the things that you'd be crazy to ignore if you were acquiring or selling your agency. And as I say, I sold a bunch of my own agencies, then I helped a bunch of other agencies sell. And I became very good at fixing all of those discount factors. And in fact, that became the original basis of the program.
On the selling and buying side, Felix, what have you learned now the transaction is done? What have you learned from the transition? Some of the lessons, whether you bought or you sold, that people should be thinking about?
If you're the founder and the CEO, again, culture matters, right? Set aside yourself for a second. The perfect listener is sitting there thinking, right, in 2 years' time, I'm going to sell my agency, I'm going to triple my value before we go there, because obviously we're going to join the 2Y3X program because it's not stupid. But I'm going to think altruistically, right? I sell my agency. What's going to happen? Well, the first thing that is going to happen is there is going to be a bigger company and a bunch of sister companies around me that are going to be my new family, right? And I have been on my own so far. Suddenly I'm going to have this family, and I'm going to have to get on with this family whether I like it or not, right? They're going to be the in-laws, and they're going to be the distaff end of the family, and they're going to, that agency over there that's now my sister agency that desperately wants to make friends with me is doing stuff that I don't like because I don't believe in CRO or whatever it is that I don't believe in, right? You're going to have to get on with a whole bunch of people. And it's not you, the founder, who's going to have to get on with all these people. It's your people. It's your team. So now, if you've identified your C players from a culture mismatch point of view, and you've got rid of them, and you know what your culture is, you know what your team's values are, personal values are, and you've got coherent culture, and it's great, and you all love working with each other, you would be foolish not to consider culture first when it comes to the deal that you do, right? Unless you're the sort of person who says, give me $6 million and I'll walk and I don't care, right? If you're that kind of person, well, I can't help. I can't help you, and I can't help your team, unfortunately. Your team is going to be left high and dry because they're the ones who've got to get on with it. So thinking altruistically, I would be thinking, okay, will my team fit the culture of the acquirer and the acquirer's other acquisitions, the other agencies in the group? Because culture is everything, right? Culture's, oh my goodness, I can't tell you how important values and culture are. So that's number one. Second thing, secondary consideration is, as a founder, will you fit the culture? Will you get on with your new boss? Because no matter how much they say, oh, no, we're all equals, and you'll be on the operational board and blah, 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 blah. You have a boss, and you are going to be reporting to the finance director who's going to treat you like an employee, right? The CFO of the group is going to treat you like some underling who has to report stuff to you. You have to get over that. And if you think that you can get over that, then great, you've got half a chance. And if you don't, make sure you've got your succession team in place. And it takes, I mean, the program gets a succession team in place within 3 months, right? Fully baked. You've now got your future. But it takes a year to get them to the point where they're really running the business and looking after the business's future. So think about it early. Think about it at least a year, if not 2, before you intend to sell. Because that succession team is going to carry your agency and your people and the value you're going to make out of this, just in case you don't survive the transition yourself. Right? And speaking from experience, I had 2 deals that worked beautifully from a transition point of view. Most of my deals were car crashes from my point of view. They were great for the team, but I hated having a new boss. I had one boss who I loved. He was the CEO of a group, and he got ousted in a very nasty boardroom coup about 18 months into our relationship after we'd been acquired. And I left almost instantly after that. And that was a pretty horrible experience too. But the other brilliant deal that I did was the last agency that I'd started that I sold. I sold it in the end of 2014. I left 7 weeks after the deal was done. And that was magic for everybody. Everybody was so relieved. The new acquirers were so relieved. I was so relieved. And I planned it very, very carefully to make sure that could happen. And everybody was in on it, and it was fine. The acquirers were in on it too. But it was, we made it happen by putting in place the succession team, and the acquirer loving the succession team, and the succession team loving the acquirers group.
Yeah.
So,
You've experienced the spectrum, let's say.
I have.
At what revenue level? I don't even know if it's a revenue level per se. Felix, does it make sense for someone to maybe if they qualify to join the 2Y3X program?
So 2Y3X, the sweet spot is for somebody joining is 2 million to 5 million of revenue. We allow companies to join the main program from about 1.2 million, I think it is the bottom level. We have a junior program for smaller agencies that need more general guidance. It's much less expensive. It's much less time commitment. But the main program, basically, if you're 1.5 million and you're a dozen people or more, then that's the entry point to the program. But as I say, the sweet spot for entry is anywhere between 2 and 5 million, I'd say.
Felix, I want to ask about momentum and what you do with momentum. But if you could quickly, I wanted to at least get one of your repeated mistakes for you to talk about for a second. Because oftentimes we learn the most from mistakes. If you were to think back on, it doesn't have to be repeated necessarily, but one of the mistakes that you made that hopefully listening people can learn from you so they don't have to make it also.
I think one of the things that comes up time and again in the program is every single agency that comes in, 2 things, maybe 3. Okay, go on and on and on. There are a couple of things that are really, really important. One is the feast and famine thing, which is just irritating. And that's lurching from growth to shrinkage to growth to shrinkage. And that by and large comes from this pilot-induced oscillation, which comes from saying, oh, we've got loads of pitches on, we can back off the lead generation process. And then we've won a load of clients. We haven't got time to pitch. We've got to bed the clients in. And then suddenly you've got a gap of 3 months of no new business, and you think, why have I got no new business? And it's because you switched off lead generation, then you switched off pitching. So putting in place processes for that, and that's usually down to the owner, founder, CEO, leader being the only person pitching, the pitching bottleneck. And that's solved by spreading the load. The second thing is being in the weeds. I used to find myself getting drawn back into the weeds all the time. And the reality is, most founders know that they can solve most problems that come up, most crises, right? I know that if somebody comes to me and says, oh, this is screwed up, or this client's left, or we've got this awful crisis, or the server went down, or somebody ran away with somebody's car, or whatever it is, right? I know what to do because I'm a leader type. And I'm smart, and I've seen it before a bit, and and if I haven't, then I can phone somebody. But I know what to do. I can solve it, and I can calm everybody down, and then guess what? You become the solver in chief. And I remember thinking, realizing one day that the job of the agency managing director is basically bathrooms and phones. Yeah, the broadband doesn't work, or and it was just like, it's always you, because there's nobody else, because that person, they're not going to do it because they're an account director. And that being drawn back into the weeds means that you can't do strategic stuff, or you can't do the important stuff. I used to love doing PR, right? I used to love going out and being interviewed, or being on stage, or writing articles in Ad Age and Campaign and all the rest of it, right? I remember being on telly once, and I used to love that stuff. I was really, really good at it. And I'd write all these articles, and I'd make waves, and we were famous. And I remember I had 3 or 4 of the people on my team came to me and said, Felix, got to tell you something. You know how you're really good at PR? Well, we found this agency, and believe it or not, they specialize in public relations. And it's new, this PR thing. And for 30 grand, we can pay them for a year, and they will generate all the coverage that you generate at the moment. And that will save you 1/3 of your time. And you can therefore spend 50% more of your time pitching, because that's the thing that only you can do. And I was like, yeah, but I'm really good at PR. And they said, yeah, but look at the cost, right? You pitching currently makes us $2 million a year. If we could add another 50% to your pitching time, we'd be making $3 million a year. And yet you're not doing it because you're doing a 30 grand a year job because you enjoy it. And it's like, oh yeah, okay. So don't be in the weeds. You need to find people who will take responsibility. And for me and us, the method for doing that is to build a growth lab team, read, scale at speed, go out and build a growth lab team, and not delegate, get them to take responsibility. Because delegation isn't good enough. You remain the bottleneck if you are still at the top delegating down. The only way to break this, you being the bottleneck, and the only way to get yourself out of the weeds, is to trust people to take responsibility for themselves. And so you need a framework for that. Whether it's our framework or somebody else's framework, there are frameworks out there that will empower people. And the second you empower people, do you know what a relief it is? The relief that it's not down to you to fix the broken bloody toilet, right? Or to fix the broadband contract, or win that client back who's being a bit arsy at the moment, right? It doesn't have to be you. And it took me years to come to that.
It's tough because it's something you like. I love that example. It's something you liked. It's something you were good at, and it's also moved the needle for the business. But there were other things that moved the needle for the business more and better and faster. And so it's good you had a team that would approach you on that and probably push back a little bit on you, because there is a resistance factor of liking it, good at it, and it's leading to business. So from the outside, it's like, yeah, keep doing that.
But that comes from hiring A players and trusting them to have good opinions and allowing them to air their opinions. And I think at that point, I was just starting to trust people. One of the big revelations that I had in my management career was that nobody's looking to you for instruction. None of your team is coming to you for instruction. They're coming to you for your permission. They're coming to you because they want your permission to solve it their way. And we can encourage that by saying, I don't know, what do you think? Right? There's Bill Marriott's famous 7 most important words for the CEO. I don't know, what do you think? And at the beginning, it infuriates people. And then after that, people will take the mickey out of you for saying it. And then after that, they'll start coming to you with solutions. And then suddenly you've got an empowered team. And that's magic. And when you have a business like that, it's wonderful to be part of.
Felix, I don't know if you have time for this. If you don't, we'll end it here. But I would love to hear what you did with momentum. If you have to go to your next call, I totally get it.
Well, I mean, you talk about momentum just because it's one of our great case studies where we have, this is a typical agency. Alpha Century is exactly the same. Impura, they're decent. These agencies come into the program because they're stuck at that 2 or 3 million mark. They don't know how to break through the ceiling because they've never been on the other side. And we've been on the other side of that ceiling. We know what the next phase is, and the phase after that, and the phase after that. And I think when you bite the bullet and you say, do you know what, I could do with outside help. That's a really, really important step because you're talking about really brilliant CEOs, and they, they build their business from scratch by grit of their teeth, and they get to a point where they recognize that they don't know what it looks like on the other side of the next wall. And I love it when I have those conversations with agency founders who say, show me the other side. Because the second you show me, I'll know what to do. And that's great. And that's what program's all about, is we bring people in and triple their revenue. I mean, in that particular case, we opened up in the States and did $1 million of revenue in the first year, right? And we serviced the business from London and grew in the States. There are tons of those kind of case studies of agencies where they just need to be shown how to liberate their people and how to empower their people and how to fix the discount factors and how to do the kind of risk-free transformation that's required. Because the second that they can see how to do it, the second that it's in their hands, they start scaling, I hate to say this cheesily, they start scaling at speed.
For momentum, do you remember one of the big ahas or takeaways for them?
I think with them, it was the realization that empowering the team would quadruple the bandwidth at the top. And I think one of the problems that you have, many agencies have, is that you've got a founder or a founding partnership where they are the bottleneck. Literally, they're the bottleneck to growth, and they're handling the crises, but they're also handling the strategic stuff, or trying to. And one of the things about the program is that it directly addresses that. We recruit a team around the founders who are a mix of junior and senior people, but all superstars within the business. And you all know who your superstars are, right? If I say who are your 5 superstars, you know who they are. So you bring those people into a team together and you co-create a plan of action for the next 3 years. And it's a great process. We call it the strategy map. And that team takes responsibility. So you're not having to delegate downwards. You are part of a team now of 5 or 6 people handling the 20 tasks that are required to make progress, rather than you being the bottleneck and you being able to drive 3 or 4 or 5 big changes each year. And one of which is, by the way, is usually your new website, which is going to take 18 months anyway, despite the fact that you're a web design company or whatever it is, right? We all have that same problem. But it is very rare that we can get more than a few big changes done as leaders on our own, because we've got to force the changes through. We've got to come up with all of the thinking. We've got to persuade everybody. Then we've got to delegate. Then we've got to monitor the delegation. Then we've got to unscrew the screw ups, and then we've got to make sure it's bedded in, and so on. That takes a lot of your attention. And as a leader, you may have bandwidth to do 5 of those things, but one of those 5 things is going to be taken up with, client number 1 who needs your attention because your name's above the door, and so on, right? And the slot number 2 is going to be taken up with crisis that's just come on. You've got too many pitches on, or you've lost a big client, or whatever it is. So your bandwidth to deliver big changes in your business is very narrow. It's very limited indeed. When you've got 5 or 6 people on a growth lab team, and each person is delivering 1 change every quarter, that's 20 changes over the course of the year, not 3 or 4. And that's what creates scaling, is that the relentless grind through a plan of action to take you to some lofty, lofty goals gets you to the lofty goals if you follow your plan. But it can only work if you can empower and motivate people. And it turns out the best way of empowering and motivating people is to get them to create the plan with you, because then you're not meeting resistance when you tell them what to do. You're giving them permission to do the thing that they wanted to do. That makes life so much easier. Anyway, that's the secret sauce of the program that we don't tell anybody about. Yeah.
And you've done the same for 2i3x. You have a team of heavyweight facilitators that are very experienced in the agency world too.
Yeah, all of our program leads have been agency CEOs themselves, agency founders. They've all sold their agency or exited in one way or another. Some of them have run groups. They are superb, amazing people. Mo there on the left, she was head of consulting for Adobe in Europe, Middle East and Africa. She was head of digital at Saatchi and Saatchi. She's been on leadership teams of all sorts of in all sorts of places. So Simon in the middle there, he came through the program. He actually was the COO of, or managing director of, an agency that joined the 2y3x program in 2017. They completed the program. They were bought right at the end of the program. The acquirer made him COO of their group, and he grew their group from £31 million revenue to £80 million revenue in 4 years. And then when he completed his exit from there, he came and joined us as a program lead, and he's now COO. So he's come full circle, and very flatteringly so. So yeah, there's a whole bunch of people here and in the States and in Europe and in the Middle East who've all run agencies and all brilliant people.
Felix, I want to be the first one to thank you. Thanks for sharing your journey. I can keep listening to you go through all this stuff. So there's just so many gems in here. So I'll be re-listening to it. I hope if you're listening to this, there's a lot that will be learned the second time around. Check out 2y3x.com to learn more. Check out Scale at Speed, the book. Felix, thanks for joining me.
Thank you so much, Jeremy. Really enjoyed it.
What I got, you can't buy. It resides between my eyes. Walked through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like a beach if you find the sailing right now. I'm feeling like $100 grand.